how do we engage people in this process? I would believe people want to participate in improvement, whether we're using the word lean or not. I believe people want to be engaged. They want to be involved. They want to be able to use their creativity. And the foundation for this really comes down to a concept and the practices that build psychological safety. A lot of it comes down to leadership, as Toyota describes, and I think this applies well in healthcare. The manager's role is to develop people to surface problems and solve problems. And I think this bottom bullet point is key. Create an environment where this happens, or we could extend that to say create an environment where people feel safe participating, where they feel safe to surface problems, and where they feel safe to try to improve. We can look at the literature about Toyota, including the book Toyota Culture, that very directly and specifically talks about the importance of psychological safety. It says here that Toyota uses a holistic way of looking at the safety of all stakeholders, which includes employees. It involves providing for the physical and psychological safety of each member of the team. It's an intentional value that drives subsequent action. So we can't just demand that people feel psychologically safe. We need to take action. As Tim Clark, the author of the book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, defines, psychological safety can be defined succinctly as a culture of rewarded vulnerability. Vulnerability means when we take an action, when we speak up, when we do something, that there's the exposure to the risk of harm or loss. That risk of harm or loss could include punishment. So instead of telling people that they should be brave or that they have a professional obligation to speak up, a culture of improvement reduces the perceived risk. It reduces the fear factor so that people feel safe and they can choose to participate. Clark's longer definition says that psychological safety is a social condition in an organization, we would say, in which you feel, and again, this is an individual perception or feeling, and this will vary within a team across different people. The level of perceived psychological safety will vary across a broad and diverse organization, across different teams. But when you feel psychological safety, you feel included, you feel safe to learn, you feel safe to contribute, and you feel safe to challenge the status quo, all without the fear of being embarrassed, marginalized, or punished in some way. So when organizations attempt to engage people in improvement, in Kaizen, in continuous improvement, without that foundation of psychological safety, we may see an improvement board that sadly looks like this. A board that's been copied from a different healthcare organization that had active participation in continuous improvement. But in this other organization, we see months later after this was installed on the wall, the board is not being used. I would never expect that the employees working here don't know about the problems and that they don't have ideas. It's more likely a lack of psychological safety that prevents them from speaking up. If they feel like they are going to be blamed or attacked or punished in some way, they will choose to protect themselves, even when they're highly motivated intrinsically. The organization may teach them that it's either unsafe or just not worth the effort to speak up. The two main reasons people choose not to speak up are either due to fear or futility. So even if people aren't afraid to speak up, if they think speaking up doesn't lead to constructive, supportive action and improvement, people might conclude it's not risky, it's not dangerous, it's just not worth the time. So again, this comes back to leadership and their role and their responsibility in trying to help create or cultivate this culture. So what can leaders do? Again, going back to Tim Clark and his excellent book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, it really comes down to two key high-level actions on the part of leaders at all levels, really starting with the chief executive and other senior leaders. That those leaders, first off, model these vulnerable acts. That could include things like admitting a mistake, saying things like, I could be wrong, so let's go test my idea in practice. That all sets a good example for others to perhaps follow. Leaders can't just tell others to do these certain things. Leaders need to lead the way. They need to lead by example. And when they do so, if people feel a high enough level of psychological safety, they may try to follow their lead. And when they do, leaders need to then reward these same vulnerable acts. This creates, again, more positive cycles through the organization. Leaders can't just say the right things. They can't just encourage people to speak up. They certainly can't say you should feel safe to speak up. Leaders need to demonstrate that that is actually true by modeling and rewarding vulnerable acts. So we would see a couple of key progressions. When leaders model vulnerable acts, then people working for them may choose to follow their lead. When leaders reward these vulnerable acts, that builds a higher feeling and a higher perception of psychological safety. Higher levels of psychological safety mean people are more likely to speak up. That means more learning from mistakes. That means more improvement. And that leads to more organizational success along the lines of SQDCM: safety, quality, delivery, cost, and morale.